Hello everyone, welcome to week 6 of EPM 4355, ISO 14001 standards. This week we are going to learn about what ISO calls documented information. We start with our Plan, Do, Check, Act diagram, and we see that we are still in the do phase here, looking at the support and operation clauses of ISO 14001. This week we're going to be looking at how documented information is both required and supportive of environmental operations throughout an organization. We're going to look at some key definitions, explore the role of documented information, look at the documentation structure that's required by 14001, and then review some of the actual requirements from the standard. So we'll start off with a definition. The documented information is defined as information required to be controlled and maintained by an organization and the medium on which it is contained. This is interesting because it's both the actual information itself as well as the medium. Documented information can be in any format, any media from any source. This means videos, electronic recordings, hard drives, flash drives, any form in which media can be retained, a written hard copy, anything can be documented information. Documented information within an EMS can refer to the environmental management system, including the processes. Information created in order for the organization to operate, this is referred to as documentation. And evidence of results achieved, this is referred to as records. So as we'll see later, in note 2, what's being described here is essentially 3 levels of information that are required by an EMS. These are sort of the minimum levels and minimum types of information that we would find within an EMS. Documented information provides multiple benefits to an organization. First off, it provides written evidence of management structure. Something that's documented, something that people can refer to so we get a common understanding of exactly how the organization is being managed. Second, it supports the orderly and rational improvement of the management systems because it provides a trail, if you will, or a series of development milestones so you can see where you've come from, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and use what has worked to improve how the management systems are functioning. Documented information aligns the organization's activities because you can sit down with your documents and figure out how your processes are all working together and whether there's some of them that work better than others. It also provides a reference point when issues arise, when you have trouble with a particular process, or a process is not fully integrated, or perhaps people don't quite understand what they're supposed to do, as we saw in awareness and communication. It's a reference point. Documented information provides a point that you can go back to and say this is how things have been defined so we get a common understanding. Documented information also provides a clear focus on intended results and reduces the potential for deviation. When we document objectives, we state very clearly where we're going, and that also again leads to a common understanding of the goals, of the outcomes that are being desired by management. The documented information also allows management to identify errors and replicate successes. When you have a paper trail or a documented trail, you can go back and figure out what happened and figure out why the mistakes are being made and why things went well and how things went well in one area could possibly be applied to another area. Also, documented information supports prevention of litigation, fines, and other non-compliance actions. It's essentially a series of informational steps that describe how the compliance obligations were arrived at, how they were applied to the organizational operations, how the compliance status was assessed and by whom and by when. And so if there's ever any litigation or fines as to any non-compliance issues, they can help prevent that by showing that the organization took solid efforts to prevent non-compliance, and perhaps even in its opinion, it is in compliance. So document control is a management process that is applied to documented information. Document control provides orderly and rational development of documents by allowing for a sequence of reviews and approvals. These reviews and approvals also provide traceability and accountability for changes and improvements. When you are expanding documents, the documented information, and growing it over time, you can provide a backward-looking path for understanding what has been done to improve the information needed to run the organization. Also, document control ensures that all documents fulfill a useful purpose. If it's done right, document control will include an overall review of what documents are in the system and why they're in there in the first place. Organizations tend to generate documents at a tremendous rate. Not all of these are useful, but with a document control system, at least someone is looking at them, deciding whether or not this particular document needs to be used, or if it's fulfilling a useful purpose, or can be discarded or archived. Also, document control ensures that unimportant, useless, or potentially damaging information is not distributed. Again, this is part of the overall document review process, and this also ensures that only valid information is published, because people are looking at what is out there in terms of documented information, and what's being distributed, how it's being distributed, who reviewed and approved it for distribution, who's getting it. Also, from a strategic standpoint, document control ensures that intellectual capital is kept current and kept up to date. It requires when you look at a periodic review of documents, you can see that information that's no longer applicable or no longer valid or has been superseded is removed from the system, and only the latest information is used. And one of the functions of a document control system is distribution, and so it can ensure that critical operating information is provided in a form that can be used by the people who need it. It gets the information out where it can be applied to processes and to systems, and the people who need the information have access to it. And so these are many of the benefits of a document control system. A well-run system can provide these, and also many more. Records is another area. Records are evidence that a particular process was completed according to whatever criteria the process has been established to. And so generally these criteria are reflected in the data elements of records. Records enable organizations to conduct business in an orderly, efficient, and accountable manner. They help managers understand what was done. They can help deliver services in a consistent and equitable manner. When you're delivering services, you have a record of what was performed. Generally, when you're filling out a record, you have the data elements that guide you towards what needed to be done. Records management supports and documents policy formation and managerial decision making. Provides records of the policies that have been formulated and what decisions have been made, who made them. They provide consistency and continuity, and also productivity in management and administration by facilitating the effective performance of activities throughout an organization. When you have records that are well defined and well described, and they're managed properly, The people know what they're going to be required to do in terms of completing records and where these records will be stored, who's going to be looking at them, and what information they contain. And so effectiveness is defined as generating information that is related to the data elements on the records, which are essentially criteria for performance. Records also provide continuity in the event of a disaster. When you have records management with offsite storage or archiving, if you have a disaster, you can recover your information that you need to run the organization. Records are required to meet legislative and regulatory requirements, including archival, audit, and oversight activities. So the management processes can make sure that this aspect of the legislative and regulatory requirements is met. And they also provide protection and support in litigation, including the management of risks associated with the existence of or lack of evidence of organizational activity. They demonstrate that certain things were done, how they were done, and what the results were. Records management can protect the interests of the organization, the rights of employees, clients, present and future stakeholders, by understanding exactly what has been accomplished when. And they can also, records management processes can also support and document current and future research and development activities, developments and achievements, as well as historical research. Records management is a key part of the research. And if you choose to go on to a doctoral process or go into a research environment out there in industry or in government, you'll understand how records management adds value to that process. Records management provides evidence of business, personal, cultural activity, and this evidence can be used to establish identity for the business, for people, and generate a cultural identity for the organization. And last but not least, records management serves as a corporate, personal, or collective memory. It provides a way of ensuring that we remember what was done, who did it, when, and what results were achieved. This information, by the way, is taken from the ISO standard 15489 for information and documentation on records management. If you want to look at the standard, it provides very detailed guidance on how to set up a records management system for any organization. The documentation structure within an EMS can really help or hinder an organization depending on how it's deployed. And in order to deploy it properly, it's important to understand that there are essentially 4 levels of documents within any EMS. Level 1 is policies. These are the drivers of organizational activity. They describe what should be done. They provide guidance for the future. Level 2 are procedures, which describe how the organization meets the policies, what processes it uses, what systems it uses. And at level 3, there are work practices, which are how to implement procedures. And level 4 is EMS proof of completion, which are records. Many organizations, in fact, these days, most organizations tend to combine level 2 and level 3. They have a section at the beginning describing how the procedure meets the policy, and then a set of work practice steps within that particular procedure, how to implement it. You don't have to combine these. These can be separate. Many large organizations have them separate, but many organizations do choose to combine these. The key is to understand the different purposes. The EMS manual is essentially policies. These are drivers. These are statements of what needs to be accomplished. The procedures and work practices are how to meet these drivers, how to actually accomplish what management has decided is important at both the systems level and at the daily work level. And then the records show that we really did accomplish what we wanted to accomplish and that the policy has been implemented properly. Procedures and records are related, so it's important to understand the role of different types here. This is a good distinction, I think, that can be helpful to you, and you can make with any document management system. The forms are blank forms that contain data elements. They're sort of blank. They contain certain data elements that are completed by enactment of a procedure or a work instruction, which in turn then generate records. So this is the relationship between these three forms of documents. There's your procedure, states how to do something. There's the form, which is a device for capturing information about how something was done. And once that information is captured, it turns into a record. So this helps you to organize your thoughts about how documents function in an organization according to the ISO framework. If we look at level 1, the EMS manual, we look at this as current information about the organization plus an index. And so the elements that really go in an EMS manual are, first off, the environmental policy. And we have a description then of the core EMS elements and their interrelationships, how it works, the scope of an EMS, the management authority roles and responsibilities, who's responsible for doing what, risks and opportunities. Remember, these came from the environmental or the organizational context, looking at the environmental concerns of interested parties, as well as risks and opportunities present in the transactional environment as well as the general environment. A listing of the current significant environmental aspects, criteria, and objectives. Some references to legal and other requirements, and a list of procedures related to shall statements. So this is really, the manual is an executive document. It's for all of those who are involved in the EMS. It provides guidance and criteria for making decisions. What we're going to be doing in our final project is we're going to be writing one particular piece of a manual, of an EMS manual. We're going to be looking at the significant environmental aspects, criteria, and objectives. It will also include some references to legal and other requirements, but we're not going to include these other elements. It's too complex for the time that we have. But look at this document as a guidance document. This is what the policy statement. This document defines exactly what the organization has to do in terms of moving forward and implementing its EMS, as well as how the EMS is structured and what's important to be achieved within the EMS. So the manual is kept current probably annually. We look at the annual cycle of the EMS operation, and so that the risks and opportunities, as well as environmental aspects, criteria, and objectives, are updated on a regular basis. But this really is more of a policy document. It's an overview. It doesn't provide specific guidance for people to do their work. One of the most important things that's in there is this list of procedures that relate to the shall statements. So anytime you see a shall statement, and we have these highlighted in red in our presentations, you're going to need to have a procedure. It may or may not be documented. Level 2 are the actual procedures themselves. And this is where the document control system comes in. These procedures describe how the organization actually operates the EMS. In the manual, we showed the structure and how the EMS is supposed to function and what it's supposed to achieve. Here we get into daily operations. You have to look at the internal and external issues, determine interested party needs, determine EMS scope, leadership commitment, policy development, availability, communication. These are procedures that need to be defined. How to identify risks, opportunities, potential emergency situations, identify, analyze, and communicate environmental aspects. Again, identify, have access to, determine applicability and compliance obligations, and provide resources. What you want to do is go through the standard and look at statements such as shall prepare and maintain documented information and see which procedures those apply to. And that will tell you which of these procedures have to be documented. These don't have to all be documented unless there's a statement in the standard. And so what the standard allows is some flexibility in the information structure in terms of what's documented and what's not. There are a certain set of minimum. There are actually 18 minimum required documents for any EMS, and there are other optional ones. If an organization is particularly complex, it may have many more procedures than another one. And so the level 2 procedures are also, these are more examples of them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. These are some additional requirements. Just know that whenever you see shall develop and maintain documented information, the procedures have to be documented. But there's a lot of activities that go on within an EMS, and the 14001 standard requires that management look at each activity and define it. And so these procedures have to be defined, and the records generated from them will be retained. Every one of these will have some form of record, and so you need to identify those and how your EMS operates. What you don't want to do is have too many procedures or records floating around. You want to have just the minimum number necessary. So start with just the shall statements, shall maintain documented information, and go from there. Work practices, again, as we said, are optional. They're step-by-step instructions. These are called work instructions. They generally list forms and records. If you combine these in an EMS, the level 2 and level 3 will be one document, but will also contain a list of forms and records generated. This is just good practice. And level 4 proof are completed forms and records that provide evidence of work practice completion. Again, they provide evidence that the EMS is functioning as intended, according to the policies, aspects, requirements, objectives, targets, and operational controls. The minimum EMS records that are required by the standard are here. You've got to provide documented records of nonconformities that are identified, corrective actions taken, monitoring and measuring results, including achievement of objectives and maintenance and calibration of equipment, fulfillment of the organization's compliance obligations, your assessment of compliance or non-compliance, management review and audit results, the results of external communications, employee competence must be documented in a record, process completion for every process that is defined by a documented procedure. You must include a record, and then documented information changes. Any documents used by the organization have to have some form of version control, including review and approval placed on them. So here are the requirements from the 14001 standard. The organization's environmental management system shall include documented information required by the standard, and then the second category, documented information determined by the organization as being necessary for the effectiveness. And the effectiveness is defined as environmental performance. And so this is this is an important consideration because the extent of documented information for an EMS can differ from one organization to another due to the size of the organization, its type of activities, its processes, how complex they are, products and services, how many compliance obligations it has to meet. Again, the interaction among complex processes, and then the competence of persons doing work. If you have an organization that uses a lot of people with minimal skill levels, you're going to have a lot of work instructions. But if you have people who are mainly professional, you can give them a general procedure or just describe this procedure. You don't even have to document it unless it's required. So the purpose of this requirement is to allow flexibility. One of the complaints of 2004 and the similar management system standards was that organizations had to create this very complex document management system with dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of documents floating around the organization. It becomes very difficult to manage. The 2015 revision has cut back. As I said, there's basically 18 types of procedures and records that are required, and those in addition to that are defined by management as being necessary are also required. So there's quite a bit of flexibility here. The requirements for updating and creating are that the documents have to be identified. There has to be a description, a title, date, author, reference number. The format has to be defined, and the media has to be defined. And then, again, these have to be reviewed and approved for suitability and adequacy. This is the set of requirements for document control. And so the purpose here is to make sure that documents necessary for the function of the EMS are available and suitable for use, where and when they're needed. And they're adequately protected also from a couple of different things: improper use, loss of integrity, people erasing things and making notes or using sticky notes, and also loss of confidentiality. They're not given out to people who don't need to know the information. And for control of documented information, the document management system needs to cover distribution, access, retrieval, use, storage, preservation, including preservation of legibility, change control, version control, retention, and disposition. So all of these are covered in most modern the document management systems. Most automated systems have all of these functions built into them, but just know that these are all required. And so one of the kickers here is including documented information of external origin. And so what you want to do is really minimize these because you are linking to another system that may or may not be up to date, and you may not get regular updates. So management has to decide what they want to include, what they have to identify it, and then control it. Now, ISO has left us an out. Access can imply a decision regarding the permission to view the documented information only, or the permission authority to view and change the documented information. This could this comes into play with things like databases, especially for regulations. And so the actual control, some of these elements are not going to be relevant, like storage and preservation, that kind of a thing. And so the key here is to define what these documents are, how they're being used, and what elements of control apply to them. This is a template that shows some of the elements of a controlled document. As you can see here, the revision history shows the initial release and all of the different revision levels of what was done, who reviewed and approved it, and when it was done. It shows the completion of the document, the document integrity, how many pages, what the current revision level is, the document number, so it can be identified, the title, and the type of document. It also includes reference documents and some other things, purpose, scope, and other elements that we're not going to go over. But this gives you an idea of the type of format, the type of framework that can be used to meet the ISO standards for document management and document control. So that's it. If you have any questions, ask your questions in the instructor office thread, send me an email, or leave me a voice message, and we'll see you online.